I tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Rosie.
I'm Jake.
And this is our podcast on the olden days about Digimon.
Digimon first aired in the new TV season September 1999, so it's only just from the olden days.
It's a few different things, like it's a toy catalogue. You can buy the top trumps cards and all the accessories from the show. Digimon actually means digital monsters, and it's basically fighting Tamagotchis, isn't it? So that Tamagotchis could be marketed towards boys, which is all kinds of problems about gender stereotyping and things like that. But anyway, what we're going to talk about is the first series, mostly, of 4 cartoon series about a group of kids, different groups of kids each time, going to the digital world in order to help the Digimon
save the digital world, save their own world, our world, because the two are inextricably linked. The Digiworld has apparently been created by the digital traffic that exists in our world, and of course that was very new and prevalent at the time, with the internet coming to the fore of modern society, so it's very much a product of its time.
It's a bit difficult to explain, but anyway, that was it. The reason we're mostly, or nearly only, talking about the first series is that we think it's the only one that's any good, quite frankly. It's an epic. It's got 54 episodes, even more than the Mysterious Cities of Gold. That is very special, and one of those that can never be equalled or really followed up adequately.
And I think we mentioned that the Mysterious Cities of Gold falls into that category, or probably falls into that category. One brilliant epic series that should never try to be equalled, and all attempts at doing a sequel to it are probably going to fall short. And, just to skip ahead a little, our next podcast will be on a show that also fits into that category, we think. So it's kind of like a series.
A trilogy. The second series is a direct sequel to the first series, with the same characters, some of them recurring, some of them regular, and some new characters as well. And I actually did watch that, and we'll talk a little bit about it later. The third series, I watched the first episode, and it was set in a world where the first 2 series had been a TV show, and they had these Digimon cards they were trading, and I don't even know. And I didn't watch any more. And the 4th series, I don't know very much about at all.
And let's face it, we probably don't want to know about it.
The one thing I do know is that the human characters become Digimon themselves, which is just absurd.
Yes, that's probably taking it much too far. Digimon is Japanese animated, obviously the virtual pets, Tamagotchis, that they evolved from, digivolved from, come from Japan. People compare Digimon to Pokemon because that's monsters from Japan, a huge franchise with a cartoon and everything, but we don't think they're actually that similar, and perhaps Digimon does go a little deeper into the human psyche than Pokemon does. So, perhaps to explain that, we can tell you about the 3 levels of enjoyment you might experience whilst watching Digimon, any or all of them.
Level 1 is the level on which you enjoy your Tamagotchi, your fighting Tamagotchi. What attacks does it have? What numbers does it have on the top trump card? That kind of thing. You like to see the creature digivolve into another creature and beat up another one and all that kind of thing. The kind of thing that little children might like.
As it says in the theme tune, Digivolve into Champion, Digivolve into Ultimate. And yes, that's pretty exciting on its own, as if that wasn't enough. And you can just enjoy it on that level. But there are 2 more if you care to look for them.
The second level is also quite an obvious one. If you're watching the show, you can enjoy the story, the adventure, and get interested in the characters.
Which probably most people watching the show will do, particularly if they're more than sort of about 6. You can't really help but get into the characters and plot a bit. But the third level is, well, would it be fair to say that Digimon is a show all about growing up?
It's a deep-rooted, extended metaphor, all about the trials and tribulations and rewards of growing up, yes.
Which is why we mentioned last week that it follows on quite nicely from the Mysterious Cities of Gold, because that too is kind of an allegory for growing up in many ways. Digimon doesn't have the wider world view and racial interactions and things that the Mysterious Cities of Gold has, but it does go much deeper into the growing up process in really everything it does in the show. All the characters, all the interaction between them, and that includes the Digimon characters. Everything they do, or don't do, or can't do, is in some way in the show to reflect the growing up process of the human characters.
The human characters, the children, are called the Digi-Destined, and that's because they are destined to save the digital world.
And if you watch the series all the way through, you will see all the backstory and get into that and enjoy it a lot, I am sure.
Originally there are 7 Digi-Destined. They're joined later on in the series by an 8th. We better start with Ty, hadn't we? The leader of the Digi-Destined.
Yes, indeed. Very much the leader of the Digi-Destined. I really like Ty as a character and a leader. He, in many ways, is the main embodiment of the growing up process in the show. He certainly forges the way for all the rest of the Digi-Destined to grow, to learn, to actually get up and do things while they're in the digital world. Or rather have a tendency to sit around and say, oh, what are we going to do? Or perhaps nothing. And Ty's the one who'll absolutely come and drive them to it and make sure that what needs to be done is done. In that way, I think he's very like Esteban from the Mysterious Cities of Gold. He's the driving force, the absolute determination that things will work out for the best in the group. He says at one point, doesn't he, I won't ever give up, ever. And I said to him, yes, we know you won't. Whereas other members of the group might be prone to waver at times. But of course, growing up with this attitude does have its advantages, but at times it might make you try and take a big step too far too soon, do too much too fast. And that's why certain things happen to Ty and his Digimon in the plot of the show to reflect that.
Yes, perhaps I'll explain now, I think I will, that most of the Digimon characters spend most of the time in rookie form. So they're probably about an average of 3 feet tall, 2-3 feet.
Yes.
They have quite simple attacks, and then, as Jake was telling us, when they need to be stronger, they'll digivolve into Champion, digivolve into Ultimate. And Ty's Digimon is, when he's in Rookie, a dinosaur called Agamon. And to reflect the fact that Ty is maturing or growing up quicker than the others, it's always Agamon, in whatever form, who digivolves first. He's the first to digivolve into Champion, Greymon. Later on, he's the first to digivolve into Ultimate, Metal Greymon. He's also the first to warp digivolve, much later on in the series, into War Greymon.
Which is the Mega form.
That's right. But then, what Jake was alluding to a moment ago is Skull Greymon. And Skull Greymon is a really quite scary sort of skeleton dinosaur Digimon. And he comes along when Ty feels that he has the means to make Greymon digivolve into Ultimate, and he tries to force it by force feeding him and deliberately putting himself in danger, because they found out that when we're in trouble, our Digimon get bigger and save us. Even though Skull Greymon does defeat the enemy, he then turns on the Digi-Destined and starts running amok, and the point of that is that you can't force growing up, because you will turn into something bad and something that you're not, or bad things will happen.
And it's very much shown that Ty's absolute determination for Greymon to evolve at that stage came from the right place, the determination, the courage inside him. But because he wasn't ready, bad things happened. And we can take away from that either, wow, that was a very exciting episode of Digimon, or, wow, that was a very exciting episode of Digimon and it has very important something to say about growing up in real life.
Or if you want to stick to the first level, you would think, whoa, he digivolved into an evil skeleton.
And all three levels have their merits, and perhaps work best when appreciated all three together.
The reason that Ty thinks it's time for Greymon to digivolve into Ultimate is that he has found his crest. Now, what they have to start with is they all have a Digivice, which allows the Digimon to digivolve from Rookie into Champion. Then they find out that the Digimon can and will digivolve further if they all find these crests. And that's the episode on which I seem to remember only Ty has his crest.
I think so.
And he's saying, right, well, now I've got my crest, you should be able to digivolve. It's as if to say, well, now that I'm 18, I should leave home. But what if you're not ready?
And of course they'll find out later that the crests in themselves really are meaningless and the power comes from within. And Ty goes through that lesson so that the whole group can learn it really, because he is always leading from the front and having these experiences first.
And Greymon is the first to digivolve, isn't he?
Yes, a little later.
Not until they've all got their crests, because teamwork is extremely important. And let's talk about Ty's Crest of Courage, shall we?
Yes, Ty's Crest of Courage is an extremely good crest for the character, because, as we've said, he has a tremendous amount of courage. He is the driving force behind the group. He's determined to get things done, do the right thing.
And the time when your Digimon will digivolve into Ultimate is the time when you will most display the quality of your crest. It's a difficult thing to put into words, but when Ty shows courage at the crucial moment. And the good thing, one of the many good things about Digimon is that it knows what courage is. It doesn't think that courage, as Mufasa would say, is going looking for trouble, but it's doing what has to be done when you are most afraid. And it's a very good episode, actually, in which Ty has to do that, because Izzy, who we'll talk about later, but he's the one who says things like, well, we're just digital in this world. And Ty thinks that means they can do absolutely anything and not be in any danger, and he's going around jumping through these barriers that can kill you if you accidentally jump through the wrong place. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And then he finds out that if you die in the digital world, you die in real life, and he has to go through one of these barriers, and they're saying, well, this is the right place, and he's all like, oh my god, what if it's not? What if it's wrong? But of course he has to do it, and he screws up his courage, and through the barrier he goes, and then Greymon is able to digivolve.
You touched there on some of Ty's faults, and of course all well-rounded characters have faults.
Flawed protagonists.
Yes, exactly, and Ty, as was demonstrated there, can be a bit brash, a bit too keen to do too much too fast. He can be a bit of, well, sometimes the others say a bit of a bully, but he can be very forceful and try and force his ideas on everyone, but they blooming well need it sometimes, don't they? But it all comes from a very good place. It's none of it because he feels that he's the best or what he thinks is right no matter what. He does it because he knows that certain things need to happen for the right thing to come out. So yes, he is a flawed protagonist.
I think as the series goes on and the characters develop, he learns to take a more softly approach and reason with people more than kind of bully them or try to force them too much.
And you see more of that side of him, of course, when his little sister Kari comes in.
Ah, yes.
Who very much does reveal his soft, more caring, less sort of brash side. Let's talk about some of the imagery before we move on to the next member of the Digidestined. We were saying how the Japanese animation style wasn't afraid to use the adolescent human form in an artistic way in the Mysterious Cities of Gold. And the same is true in Digimon, but not in quite the same way. The characters don't actually physically change during the course of the series in terms of looking at them. They don't develop huge muscles and things. That side of things is done with the Digimon. The Digimon change physically to reflect how the characters have grown and where they're at and how they're feeling at the time. But the show does use imagery with the Digidestined, and with Ty, I think it uses a lot of alpha male imagery. There are, as we were saying last time, preconceptions about male and female roles and imagery, and there's the rights and wrongs of it, but it's certainly there. And everything about Ty is very traditionally boyish. I was thinking this at the beginning of the series, even the fact that his predominant colour is blue is very much reflective of his position as the sort of alpha male of the group. And I think, is that really what they're going for? And then there was this quite overt bit of phallic imagery when Ty was controlling this digger or something. And he was yanking on this huge long lever that was right between his legs, making a face and going, "Arr!" And I thought, yes, they are going for sort of alpha male imagery with Ty, which I thought was quite interesting.
If you want something a little bit less overt than that, there's Ty's telescope.
Oh yes, he carries a phallic image around with him all the time.
Just a little phallus in his pocket.
And it's quite useful for doing things like climbing to the top of Spiral Mountain or whatever and looking at the whole Digiworld through, but he doesn't really need to be carrying around an extendable phallus in his pocket with him for the story. It's more imagery, I would think.
Does this bring us quite nicely onto Matt now?
Yes, let's move on to Matt.
At the beginning of the series, Matt and Ty very much vie for dominance, and then they revisit that idea later on in the series, towards the end, once they seem to have come to terms with it already. But anyway, Matt also wants to be alpha male. The difference between him and Ty in terms of masculinity is that Matt isn't very masculine.
I was saying that Ty was drawn, presented, animated in a very boyish way, traditionally boyish, and Matt isn't. Matt is very pretty looking. He has a girl's t-shirt with no sleeves. He stands like a girl, thrusting his hips out.
He stands like Daphne from Scooby-Doo, I always say.
He's not, feminine as such. He's just obviously more in touch with his feminine side than Ty is.
Ty's got great big lace-up trainers like a boy, and Matt has more sort of girly shoes.
Yes, he does. He has shoes that are a lot more like the girls' shoes, slip-on shoes. Now, you might say, oh, don't be silly, it's all just, you can't define gender as shoes and shorts and colours and things. Well, no, you can't, really, but we're talking about traditional imagery being used to build the characters in this way.
Symbolically.
Yes, it's all symbolic. Now, that's not to say that Matt is girly. Matt obviously feels very comfortable in his own skin. He's not always very comfortable in his own head, I think it's worth saying, but he is very comfortable with himself and in his own skin, and he doesn't project the kind of traditional alpha male persona that Ty does. But that's not to say that he's not strong and capable like Ty. He is. They're kind of two sides of the same coin.
Of course, being feminine or female doesn't mean you're not strong and capable, does it?
No, it's not. It's just traditional images being used to kind of create and back up the characters. And that's not to say that they're correct and that any notions of male and female should be limited in any way. It's just an effect they're going for, which I think works rather nicely. The main reason I think that Matt isn't always comfortable in his own head is that he has a very difficult relationship with his family. Ty doesn't have a difficult difficult relationship with his family, although Ty's parents are the worst parents.
I think we'll talk about them when we talk about Kari, won't we?
Yes, they really are. There's no worse parents than them in the world. But, again, I'm going into traditions here and not saying that everyone who doesn't have a traditional nuclear family is maladjusted, but Ty's parents are still together, they're having a happy family home. Well, happy family home is extremely flawed. Whereas Matt has a lot of issues about his parents being split up, divorced, and his little brother TK going off to live with Mum while Matt lives with Dad. He just has more kind of family turmoil than Ty does, and that's very much reflected in what Matt does and says and thinks about himself and about other members of the group at various times.
Matt's Digimon, Gabumon, is always the next Digimon to digivolve. So obviously he's growing up quite fast as well.
It's interesting how, at the beginning of the show, Gabumon is always, as well as protecting Matt, protecting TK, who's much younger than Matt, and is his brother, as I just mentioned. Mm-hmm. And TK's Digimon, who we'll talk about later, isn't ready yet to digivolve and protect TK, just as TK is not yet ready to grow up and think for and look after himself. I was saying, wasn't I, it's interesting how, at this point, Gabumon is always looking after TK as well, and then as TK progresses and grows throughout the series, Patamon, his Digimon, grows and progresses along with him. So that's another bit of interesting imagery.
We better talk properly about TK next, hadn't we?
Yes, I think so.
I remember the bit, again, quite early on, where they're all going to sleep in the tram, and Matt is still finding it difficult to express his feelings. He's one of those sorts of characters. And he doesn't want to be seen to be too worried about TK, so he gets Gabumon to go and look after him and make sure he's warm enough while they're all going to sleep.
And let's just say, because we said it about Agumon, Gabumon digivolves into Garurumon, who's this very cool sort of quadrupedal wolf. And then the ultimate form is Were-Garurumon, who's bipedal and is a werewolf.
And you've sometimes said that as a general rule, the further Digimon evolve, the more human they get.
As a general rule, it's true, isn't it?
Yes. Perhaps we'll talk about that with the other Digimon. It's not true of Agumon and all the Greymons. They're just dinosaurs, although War Greymon is more human than the others.
Yes, War Greymon in the Megaform is getting quite human and not that dinosaur-like. Whereas Gabumon in his Megaform, which is Metal Garurumon, goes back to being quadrupedal. So, rules of thumb, they don't always ring true for everything.
It's the exception that proves the rule.
Let's talk briefly, before we move on to TK, about the relationship between Matt and Ty. As has been mentioned, it is, in some ways, a rivalry, but really it isn't. That's kind of the superficial aspect to the relationship that they both kind of get over rather quickly and then later have to get over it again, because Matt, when he's feeling conflicted about himself, is goaded, tricked into thinking he wants to go and fight Ty for leadership of the group, but actually he doesn't really. But I said while we were watching it recently, and I stand by it, that Matt and Ty are the only really two members of the Digidestined, apart from them with their own siblings, that have a proper, deep relationship between the two of them. Now, as you said very rightly, any two members of the Digidestined can go into a scene together and work together and be friends, be allies.
Be pleased to see each other if they're split up.
Exactly. But Matt and Ty are the only ones who actually have a kind of deeper, obvious relationship. Friendship, at least. And when Matt is goaded into coming and jeopardising that friendship by Cherrymon, who is a tree who's doing an impression of Marlon Brando and is working for the Dark Masters, who are evil, as you might expect.
I mean, that's obvious, isn't it?
Yes. Cherrymon is deliberately attacking the relationship between Matt and Ty because he knows that it is the strongest relationship in the group, and if it's severed or damaged, the relationships within the group will collapse and the group itself will suffer, as indeed it does. In fact, they all start wandering off in different directions after that, don't
They do.
You don't get with other characters the kind of emotional response to each other that you get with Matt and Ty. There's the bit where they meet up when everyone's been separated, and they meet up on this sort of iceberg, don't they? And whilst there, they have a little fight and realise that they don't really want to rival each other and have a lot of respect for each other and appreciate each other's feelings. And, I don't know, their rivalry should probably end there, really, but thanks to Cherrymon it doesn't. But on that, they meet up and they're so pleased to see each other, and then they have a little tussle, and at the end they're grasping hands. And then after Matt's gone off later and started sulking about, he comes back and Ty's all exhausted. And they have this emotional, tearful reunion with Matt kind of cradling Ty, which is the one time you kind of see Matt in the more traditionally male position over Ty.
Showing that these things are very flexible and have not necessarily got clearly defined boundaries.
Well, exactly. So that's why I think the Matt and Ty relationship is the only really solid one in the series as a pair, and the most interesting one in the group. And of course, I'll say again, I mean, as well as the sibling relationships. Obviously, Matt and TK have a pair relationship. Ty and Kari have a pair relationship because they're both groups of siblings. And we may touch on in this series TK and Kari also having a bit of a pair relationship later on. But Matt and Ty is certainly the dominant one.
Yeah.
And I just want to come back quickly to what I was saying about imagery earlier, because we sort of touched on it with Matt. They do use, in the series, I was saying they didn't use the Digidestined body changes to reflect anything with imagery, but they do use, in the bit where they all end up in Devimon's fake hotel,
The fake hotel, yes.
they do use nudity, or wearing underpants anyway, as an image for vulnerability. And this is the point before they all get split up and end up in different places and are on their own and vulnerable, and so to reflect that, they've been drawn wearing just their pants.
We think maybe some of them haven't even got their pants on, don't we? We
Well,
think Matt doesn't wear pants.
Matt doesn't wear pants in bed, which does back up what we were saying about how he's very comfortable in his own skin.
There's a shot of him lying down in the bathrobe, as Americans call it, with his leg hitched up, and you just know he hasn't got any pants on.
Yes, he goes commando. And it's a very interesting bit of imagery, actually. They've been tricked by Devimon into feeling secure in this hotel, which isn't really a hotel at all. And so they're all naked. And then when they find themselves, in the Arctic with just their pants on their own, they realise, hang on, I'm vulnerable. I shouldn't have felt secure there. We're much better as a group with our clothes on, and we're stronger in that way. So any kind of thing like that, where they're all naked, is used purely artistically.
When we meet up with the characters after they've all been split up like this in their pants, we don't see them all get their clothes back, but we do see Ty get his clothes back, and doesn't Agamon bring them to him?
Yes, he does, and he accidentally burns Ty's shorts, doesn't he?
That's right, but that's quite symbolic. Your Digimon is making you less vulnerable, more secure, and that's all got to do with growing up and becoming more secure in yourself.
That's right. The Japanese aren't afraid to use, 12, 13-year-old characters standing around in just their pants to show that artistically. And good for you, Japanese. It's quite bright not to be afraid to do that.
And that's just before Matt and Ty meet up on the iceberg or something, which you were talking about.
It is.
And I saw some screen caps of them punching each other in the face, which actually got cut from the American version.
Yes. We might just mention now they do make a few changes to make it more kind of Western friendly in the American version. Like cutting those punches There's more of the kind of bath scene where Joe comes in, and we haven't mentioned Joe yet,
No.
and doesn't want the other boys to see his to see him completely naked. And we get in there, I believe. I've seen the Japanese subtitles to Matt being very comfortable in his skin and not approving of boys who aren't. And there's just a few things like that that make it more accessible, more acceptable for the American audience. There's a couple of changes to dialogue for that as well, isn't there?
I was just thinking of one which is relevant now, when Ty's got no clothes on and it's like the Arctic. He says in American, "Mom was right, I should have brought a sweater." And I read that in Japanese he's saying, "Oh my gosh, Agumon, I'm going to freeze to death."
Which is a lot more hardcore, really.
Mm.
And then, of course, there's the bit where Mimi and Sora flag down a random surfer dude driver and get him to give them all a lift by being all sexy at him. And in the American dub, they had to turn that into Sora's cousin, otherwise it would be completely inappropriate, although Mimi still does come on to him, which perhaps is sexualizing adolescent people in some ways, but...
That's why he couldn't be her cousin.
Exactly.
He had to be Sora's.
But I'm sure it's artistically justified. But shall we move on to talking about TK now?
Yes, we were talking about him ages ago, weren't we? He's about 7 years old, I think, rather than 12, 13. When I first saw the series, which we haven't explained, have we? We caught the end of it after Jake had done his A-levels and I'd done my GCSEs. And I always thought TK was cute as a button. And actually, that's quite deliberate because he symbolises all sorts of things to do with being a younger child and that phase of growing up.
Yes, as you were saying, TK is purity. And that's why he, I think, is the other half of Esteban from Mysterious Cities of Gold. He's half Ty and half TK. Well, I'll just go back to when you were talking about when we actually watched it. When it was first on, we didn't watch it. And I was kind of at the stage of thinking, ooh, Digimon's more Pokemon-like stuff, but it's rubbish. Won't be nearly as good as Hey Arnold and other things on ITV that we do like. And I was very much in the age of non-believing at that point. But then I was quite surprised coming across it in, I think, sort of summer '01 when we found that repeat, how deep it actually was, and we started getting into talking about this sort of thing. But it's only after watching it in recent years we've really seen the many, many levels that it has.
You have to see it all the way through, really, and to see Skull Greymon.
Although the advantage with just watching the final arc is that you don't realise that it's actually kind of already happened and a bit redundant earlier in the series before they all go back to Tokyo.
That's true. TK's crest is the crest of hope, which is very appropriate, and we didn't mention Matt's crest, did we?
Oh, we better say that very quickly.
The crest of friendship.
Mainly for Joe, it seems.
Yes. Where Garurumon's Diner is the episode in which the crest is activated, as it were, and we first see Where Garurumon, and it's a very memorable episode with an excellent title.
I love Where Garurumon's Diner. It's a brilliant episode, and the best bit is where Matt doesn't want to be stuck there cooking rice until he's an old geezer, which is absolutely hilarious. Right?
He accuses Joe of making him do it deliberately, doesn't he? Breaking dishes so they'll keep having to pay their debt.
Yes. It's very funny, but of course it's all very artistically justified as well. And Matt's crest of friendship is interesting because he does sometimes have trouble in his own head, in his own soul, being a good friend, and he thinks of himself sometimes as not a good friend. Oh, I'm just a jerk, I wish there was something I could do about it. And Gavin will say to him, well, there is, Matt. Be a good friend, like you have been already. So his crest doesn't kind of come as naturally to him, I think, as Ty's crest. Which is why when Matt and Ty have their huge emotional, tear-stained reunion and Matt's crest glows so strongly, it's kind of the end of a journey.
The reason why Gabumon is a good Digimon for Matt is that he is good at saying things like that and gently encouraging him and reassuring him, which is what he needs.
That's very true. Whereas Agumon is less of a kind of confidant than Gabumon would be. He is much readier to just get on and digivolve and do what needs to be done because that reflects where Ty is at. The Digimon very much match the personalities of their Digidestin and give them whatever support they need, whatever way they need it at the time.
Shall we talk about Agamon's irritable bowel syndrome?
It's just a random funny thing, of which there are quite a few in the series. Agamon has extreme problem with irritable bowel syndrome, and it's amusing because, they don't overdo it, they just do it for a laugh occasionally. And they stick it in, and the dub is very funny about it. It's just one bit of random funniness that they put in the show, and why not?
Worth mentioning, I think, because it does certainly bring something to the enjoyment of the show. It's not done in a sort of crass way, and the product of irritable bowel syndrome is pink, which makes it kind of okay for TV, doesn't it?
I don't want to talk about it, Ty. He says when he's having trouble on the toilet.
And it happens in the back of the surfer dude's van, and pisses him off quite a lot.
Yes.
We were talking about TK, though, weren't we?
Yes, let's talk some more about TK. Were you going to mention his crest, because we were talking about Matt's crest?
I said it's the crest of hope, and TK is innocence and purity and hope. His Digimon is Patamon. Patamon spends a long time as Patamon in his rookie form. There's quite a few episodes where, as Jake was saying earlier, TK and Patamon, if his boom bubble is not enough, are happy to rely on Matt and Gabumon/Garurumon. And that's because TK is younger than the rest of them, and he's taking his time growing up, and he's never impatient for Patamon to digivolve. I actually had a false memory of people saying to him, don't you wish Patamon would digivolve? And then I started thinking, oh, well, maybe it's Angemon, who we'll talk about in a minute. Don't you wish Angemon would digivolve? And TK saying, no, he'll digivolve when he's ready. But he never says that. But it's quite obvious that that is what they're going for.
Yes, very true. And then when finally we do get Angemon turning up to defeat Devimon, which is very appropriate, he's actually the most powerful champion-level Digimon that we'll see, and Angemon's the only champion-level Digimon you will actually see attack and wound a Mega-level Digimon, which is 2 levels above, later in the series, Apocalypse. Because TK has, in many ways, the most power of the Digidestined. He has the power of purity, innocence, and that's the power to save the world, save the human race. And the fact that Patamon digivolves into Angemon, who is an angel, Angemon they call him at first.
Which is much better, makes more sense, but oh well.
It's using traditional Christian imagery, yes, but I don't think it's trying to push particularly Christianity or any religion. It's just talking about, it's just symbolising innocence, purity, and good.
It's like the masculine-feminine imagery, isn't it? It's not trying to piss anybody off or push any kind of stereotypes or ideology. It's just very traditional imagery that we can understand.
Yeah, the imagery is there to do its job, and it does it well, and we shouldn't talk about the rights and wrongs of the imagery in itself, because it in no way undermines what the show is trying to say.
I do remember in the fake hotel bit, we've all been waiting for Patamon to digivolve, when it's not at all obvious he's an angel. They find a picture of an angel, and TK's saying, oh, look at that, isn't it lovely, isn't it beautiful? And Patamon saying, what is it? And TK's saying, it's an angel, it protects you, and all that kind of thing. And it's quite interesting, actually, that that's in Devimon's fake hotel.
Yes, indeed. Devimon, in a way, has to face TK and Angemon, because they're kind of the polar opposite to it.
Yes, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it?
Yes, the smallest of the Digidestined will destroy Devimon.
So he targets TK, and because of that, Patamon has to digivolve into Angemon and defeat him.
It's pretty deep stuff, you see. I like the bit where TK says, I don't ever want to fight, ever. And that's like his statement, like Tys was, I won't ever give up, ever. TK says, I don't ever want to fight, ever. That's his statement of purity, of hope, of the human race being better than the conflict it's always putting itself in.
Now, I think that's the episode where they've all split up and he isn't in a pair with another Digidestined. He's on his own, and he and Patamon go and find, essentially, Raichu from Pokemon, but no, Elecmon is his name.
Who looks after all the Digi-Eggs and baby Digimon.
And he's sort of quite arsey and challenging Patamon, and that's when TK's saying, I don't ever want to fight ever, and he makes him do a tug of war to sort out the conflict and things like that.
Yes, that's something He-Man does as well in an episode, to kind of show that you don't have to fight to resolve differences. There are other ways, better ways, that could perhaps save us all.
And of course, Patamon and Elecmon do get into a scuffle, don't they? And TK's saying, oh my gosh, Patamon's going to Digivolve, and it's got this sort of tense music, and you just know it's going to be another Skull Greymon incident if he does Digivolve. But then TK puts a stop to it.
Yes, TK was good at recognising there that he wasn't ready, Patamon wasn't ready.
And then, actually, after Angemon's defeated Devimon, he turns into a Digi-Egg, doesn't he?
Yes, he does, and the interesting thing about that is, well, that's quite interesting in itself, but it's very interesting that after the egg has rehatched and become the little baby ghost version...
Oh, I know, it's named Poyomon.
It then stays in the in-training form of Patamon, which is called Tokamon?
Yes.
For a long time, and TK... a load of episodes, wasn't it, about 8?
An awful lot.
And TK doesn't try and force him to digivolve back into Patamon, into the rookie form that they're all usually in. He knows it will happen when it's necessary and in its own time. We haven't mentioned in training form before, what I call the bouncing head form.
Many of them are bouncing heads.
Many of them are bouncing heads.
A couple of them have limbs.
When we first meet the Digimon, they're in that form, and the first time they digivolve into Rookie is when the Digidestined are in trouble. So it's kind of a sign that they're in Rookie most of the time, that the Digidestined are kind of on the cusp of growing up as well, and so are the Digimon. And they only regress into kind of in training when they're completely out of energy. Just like you might regress into your childhood if you're feeling out of energy. And when you really need to, you push back up, back into rookie form and do what needs to be done.
If something happens to you and you get really badly hurt by losing a job or getting dumped by your boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, you come home and you get out your raggy from when you were little.
So you're in training form for a bit.
But we noticed, didn't we, while Tokamon was spending all that time as Tokamon, TK was just calmly going around with him, giving him stuff to eat, looking after him, and everyone else was worrying about digivolving into Ultimate.
Yes, so TK, like Matt, is very comfortable in himself, and he represents what's good about humanity and the future of humanity, and the digital world alongside it, of course. And I really like TK as a character.
After we watched the end of the series, I tried watching some earlier episodes, which turned out to be from sort of the middle of the series, which were being repeated during this phase where they're back in Tokyo. And the one that I watched was about Matt and TK, and I was finding out about how their parents were divorced, and when TK's come to visit Dad and Matt takes him home, and I didn't understand what was going on at all. I was like, why are they in the human world? Why is Gatomon, Kari's Digimon, stalking her and threatening to kill her? It was really weird. But during that Tokyo story arc, Matt and TK's parents actually see each other for the first time in a long time, and they kind of agree to be on better terms with each other so that their relationship is better for their two sons, and they're not going to get back together, I shouldn't think. So acknowledging that families who aren't always together, a nuclear family, can be perfectly healthy and happy as long as you can all get along.
So there we have it, you see. TK and his family representing the future of the human race and human relations.
And that's the episode where that Pumpkinmon and that other one get killed. Except in English they don't get killed, they get sent to... Who's the main bad guy? Is it Piedmon?
It's Myotismon at
Myotismon.
that point.
Sorry. They get sent to Myotismon's prison in the Digiworld. And everyone's so sad, and it's so kind of tense, and you get the axe that was in Pumpkinmon's head clanging to the ground in such a final kind of way. You think, oh, come on, he killed them. And then they're always going on about, oh yes, the Digimon are going to go back to
Primary Village.
Primary Village,
where
that's the one.
Raichu lives, Electmon lives.
And they're not really dead and they're going to be fine. I was surprised to realise that we never actually saw anyone come back, and that was because, in Japan, that was never the intention. And I might as well say this now, mightn't I? I seem to remember, when I watched Series 2, we actually did, I could be totally wrong about this, do correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we did see some Digimon who had been disintegrated come back from the primary village and say, oh, hello, I'm all right, really. So obviously the Japanese cotton on to what the Americans had done and bought into it.
The American audience, the English-speaking audience, including us, is inevitably going to be their big market. So they weren't originally going for this in the first series when it was made in Japan because, well, it's a bit sissy. It's not very hardcore. The Digimon don't die. They just come back to the primary village. But it's very financially canny of the Japanese to say, right, well, we'll incorporate that into the second series because that's what our market wants. It's one of the dumbing downs they've done for the English dub, as well as doing things like introducing Sora's cousin and not have Ty saying, oh dear, I'm worried I'm going to freeze to death in my pants.
Not having them getting picked up by randoms, okay, but I think Digimon character deaths they should have stuck with. That's what I think.
And while we're off on a side note, I'll just say something I did want to say earlier, as we're talking about the English dub, which is that they've obviously had a lot of fun making the English script, and there's a lot of little jokes that obviously weren't in the original Japanese about some things in the animation, some things in the character designs. Apocalypse with his hot and cold running water is the one I always remember. He's got a kind of red tube and a blue tube coming out of him, and he's this great big apocalypse-bringing Digimon who's going to destroy the world, and he says he's got hot and cold running water coming out of him. It's extremely amusing. The bit where they go back to Tokyo is extremely amusing. Some of it's designed to be amusing, some of it is amusing because it's been redubbed in an amusing way. And that's really got nothing to do with the wider imagery and the growing up stuff, has it? It's just fun. So you can enjoy it on all levels, all at once.
Just like life.
Yes. So in many ways, it is deep as well.
Yes.
But mainly, it's just a laugh. So really, I think we can now finish talking about the Digidestined, and we'll have said everything else we wanted to say, or most of the other things we wanted to say, as a kind of side point. But let's just talk about Kari next, because we've talked about her a lot, and she is kind of the fourth most important Digidestined, I would say, even though she doesn't appear till about halfway through the series.
I like Kari. I do think she's the most multifaceted girl Digidestined. I think the show is very much geared towards boys. We were talking about Tamagotchis for boys. There are 7 Digidestined, and then 8 when Kari comes along, of which 5 are male.
That's a lot.
And I was talking about Kari's Digimon Gatomon coming and wanting to kill her. That is because, all sorts of reasons really, but basically Kari couldn't go to camp because she was ill, so she joined the Digidestined late, and her Digimon Gatomon got separated from the rest and ended up being primed for evil purposes by...
Is it still Meiotismon?
Is it Meiotismon?
I think it's still Meiotismon at that stage.
But it's okay because Kari doesn't seem to need all the initial stages of coming to terms with things and digivolving and growing up that the others do. She is wise beyond her years.
That was the expression you used for her, and it's very true, isn't it? And this is reflected in her Digimon by the fact that Gatomon wanders around in champion form all the time. She's the smallest champion Digimon you'll ever see, Gatomon, but she's up to fighting the other champions, as she proved. And her rookie form, which we don't hardly see at all, looks like a poodle. I can't even remember its name now.
Oh, I know, Salamon.
Because Kari's kind of wise beyond her years, Gatomon is comfortable staying beyond her rookie form all the time. So again, everything Digimon do reflects what the characters do and how they're growing up. Kari is like TK in many ways, in terms of being pure hope for humankind. You were saying she's a kind of Jesus figure for the Digimon, and she is, really. There's the Digimon force for good sort of thing that speaks through her later in the series. Like TK, her Digimon evolves into an angel. Angelwomon is the ultimate form of Gatomon. And, of course, the two angels, Angemon, Angelwomon, and later Magna Angemon, which is Angemon's ultimate form, will combine forces and work together and represent very much the strongest Digimon power in the team.
By the way, it takes a long time for Magna Angemon to turn up, because TK's happy to let his Digimon go at his own pace as he's prepared to grow up at his own pace. Angelwomon turns up before Angemon.
Magna Angemon.
Sorry. And, yes, as you say, it shows that Kari is good and pure and innocent like TK. She's also more things than that. Like, she's compassionate. Noble, that's right.
Self-sacrificing.
And that's reflected, I think, in the fact that her Digimon is all different things. I mean, I was saying it's not obvious Patamon's an angel, but he's not really anything else, is he?
No.
Whereas Kari's Digimon goes poodle, cat, angel.
Weird.
And I've seen on the internet that in Mega she's a dragon.
She's a dragon!
So she's many things, so I use the word multifaceted for Kari, and again, that's very much reflected in the Digimon.
TK and Kari being united in their innocence, in their angelicness, is very much reflected in that scene where they're kneeling and praying together.
They've made graves for the disappeared Digimon, which again shows actually they're dead.
And again, it's an image thing. It's not trying to say TK and Kari are good and pure because they're praying to any particular god. They're just doing something very heartfelt, very innocent, together, and in that way they're showing their purity. So in that way, as we were saying earlier, I think it's fair to say that TK and Kari do have a two-way link, like Matt and Ty, and like the two pairs of siblings, of which, of course, they're all part. And that's why they're the four really important characters to talk about, I think.
TK and Kari do start to develop a relationship. The trouble is that Kari's turned up so late they don't really have time to get into it, but Magna Angemon turns up when Kari and TK are both in some trouble and they're afraid they're going to die, and TK saying, "No, I will never give up," and then his crest of hope makes Angemon digivolve.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff, that. And that's, of course, where Patamon says, as a pun, "You two are falling for each other," and then he cuts the rope. Very, very well done.
A bit of a theme in these podcasts is strong female characters and whether or not they're just a bitch. Kari is quite the opposite of just a bitch. She is a strong, feisty, very capable female who is the nicest person you could hope to meet.
Yeah, that's a really positive role model, something we can all aspire to, whether we're female or not.
Exactly. Shall we talk about the relationship between Ty and Kari?
Oh yes, that was the other thing with this, wasn't it? Ty is extremely moved by Kari's innocence and purity, as we find out in the scene where in the flashback scene where he's moved to tears by her response to when she collapses in the park and is really ill, and all she's worried about saying to Ty is she's sorry she couldn't kick the football, and that turns Ty into an absolute quivering heap because she's so innocent. And that's another example of their parents being absolutely stupid and neglectful and abusive, by the way.
Yes, let's see. Ty's about 7 in this flashback, coming home from school on his own, finding his sick little sister at home on her own, because he's just a child, wanting to go out and play, not wanting to leave her, so being much more responsible than his parents.
Yeah.
He thinks she's okay, so he takes her to the park with him and she collapses and needs an ambulance and nearly dies. And then we get to the hospital. His mother has quite clearly smacked him in the face,
yes.
although that's cut for the English dub, the actual smack, but you can see the red mark and he's holding it, and she says something like, "Do you have any idea what you've done?" You can't say that to a little 7-year-old.
It's a form of child abuse, and of course what he's done is try and look after Kari, which they haven't. They leave her on her own all day and night in an unlocked apartment in the middle of Tokyo. I mean, they're terrible.
And that's when Ty on his own has come back from the Digi world and has to do some things with Agumon/Greymon there.
And Koromon, which is the in-training form.
That's right.
Very much linked into all this, Kari's crest is the crest of light, which is very much like the crest of hope, I think. It represents what's good and true. And I actually think that we, in English, don't have probably an adequate word for the concept that Kari's crest is supposed to represent. I bet they have a much better name for it in Japanese, and the closest they could come for English was light. But you were saying something like nobility would be a better name for her crest, perhaps.
It's activated, I think, and makes Angelwomon happen when she sacrifices herself to Myotismon in order to stop him from destroying the whole world.
Which is very noble, and also pure. So TK and Kari, like Matt and Ty, are very much cut from the same cloth, but do have certain differences, certain different aspects to their purity, to their hope, to their role in the saviour of the human race, symbolically. So let's talk about the other 4 Digidestined.
Shall we start with Joe, because we've mentioned him a few times?
Joe. I really like Joe's Digimon Gomamon, who's a kind of seal who digivolves into Ikakumon, who's a walrus, and then Zudomon, who's a walrus with a warhammer, and then later he evolves, not on the show, but you can read about it, into kind of a full Viking, which is quite interesting.
I think his name's Vikamon.
Yes, I love Gomamon. He's really funny, and he has this flying fish attack, which is very amusing.
Marching fishes!
Yes, but he's very amusing, very sort of cheeky. He does things like sneak into the girls' bath and stuff. And the thing that I found interesting about Gomamon and Joe was that Gomamon kind of led the relationship between them. With the other Digidestined, their Digimon very much backed them up, supported them. But with Gomamon, he had to kind of force Joe out of his shell, give him these kind of pep talks, say to him, "Come on, Joe, put yourself together." So perhaps because Joe is so reserved, he needed more sort of oomph to kind of come out of himself and grow up. And Gomamon's very amusing about it as well.
You get the perfect Digimon for your personality, and the one that you need to turn you into the best you can be.
Indeed. And Joe does have a lot of internal struggles. His father wants him to be a doctor. He doesn't want to be one necessarily. He has quite a good relationship with his older brother, it seems, but he has some issues there. He has a lot of self-confidence problems, Joe. He's paranoid. He needs a lot of help to come out of himself. And his crest is reliability, isn't it?
Yes.
And he has to learn to trust himself and be someone that you can count on. And he does this by giving TK some wood at one point, doesn't he? So he's not going to sink.
He actually swims down and pulls him to the surface before he gives him the wood.
He does, yeah.
TK's wishing for Matt because he's drowning and having these sort of flashbacks, his life's flashing before his eyes, even to when Matt has protected him in the past, and then you see the hands grabbing him and taking him up to the surface, and TK's like, "Well, who is it?" And it's Joe. And then Joe actually has worn himself out and starts drowning himself, but because he's been reliable and saved TK, Zudomon can then save him.
Yes, very symbolic. The trouble is with Joe that I feel that he doesn't kind of demonstrate his crest quality when it's not directly being used, and he kind of regresses into his old self too much. He has a bit of a reset button. I think Ty, Matt, TK, Kari all very much demonstrate the qualities of their crests at all times and have their journeys to do with those crests that all make progress in the right direction. But I don't feel that Joe does. I feel he kind of chops and changes back and forth and doesn't really seem to be having as much of a progressive journey as I would like.
You mentioned his brother, Jim, who says things to him like, have you told Dad that you don't want to be a doctor? And you don't have to be a doctor if you don't want to be, which is the sort of thing Gomamon might say, I suppose.
Yes, indeed.
So it's quite annoying when you watch the first episode of Series 2 and he's starting to be a doctor. You think, oh, Joe, come on, you sold out, man.
One of the problems with a sequel series, like we were saying about the Mysterious Cities of Gold, or I was, it might kind of nullify some of the development from the first series, and you find that very disappointing if you'd invested in it emotionally.
One thing that seems like a very small thing, but I do like about Joe, is that he has a picture of some kind of marine mammal on his phone card, which makes you think, oh yes, their Digimon is in a form that they kind of like. It doesn't ever say Ty likes dinosaurs, but you can imagine that he would.
It's a very traditionally boyish thing to like, isn't it?
That
Again,
is so true.
It's that imagery.
And Matt likes wolves, and Kari has her cat Miko, who you see her worrying about and taking care of, and Gatamon is a cat.
It's just come to me, the lone wolf.
Oh, yes!
Matt is kind of the lone wolf
Oh,
at
my
times,
gosh.
and he has to come to terms with that as he comes to terms with himself.
And then all of this goes quite nicely into Mimi, because Mimi is a girly girl. She wears pink and she likes flowers, probably, which is why her Digimon, Palmon, is a sort of plant thing.
Palmon digivolves into Togemon, who is a cactus with boxing gloves. And there's this scene where Togemon is fighting a giant teddy bear Digimon, and I was saying while we were watching it, if you didn't know why this was happening, this cactus with boxing gloves was fighting this giant children's teddy bear,
Punching it in the face with her boxing gloves.
you might think, what is this children's cartoon? It's a bit weird. It's not really the kind of thing I'd want my children to watch. But actually, what the fight is representing is very deep and very relevant, and the fact that it's a giant cactus with boxing gloves shouldn't detract from that.
Nor the fact that it's a big yellow teddy bear.
Togemon will later digivolve into Lilymon, who is quite small, isn't she, for an ultimate level Digimon? And she's very much more human looking. That very much holds true there.
She's a flower fairy.
She is, with her flower cannon. Like Joe, I do find Mimi a bit chop and change with whether she's actually demonstrating the quality of her crest. What's it actually called?
Sincerity.
Sincerity. Which is very suitable for Mimi because she has to learn not to be so superficial. She's always going on about shopping and dresses and things at first. And like Tao in the Mysterious Cities of Gold, she has to come to realise that friendship and nobility and the Code of Thundera is more important than that. And she does realise that, which of course will activate her crest of sincerity and allow Togemon to digivolve into Lilymon. But, like Joe, I feel she kind of falls back too much. She becomes too superficial again, and doesn't seem to have a sort of continuous journey, which I think is a bit of a shame.
I can't really think of much else to say about Mimi, except that I do enjoy the dub of her. She can be very funny.
She can be very funny sometimes, can't she? You just grew up, now get out! That's when she doesn't want to push Palmon around in the pram anymore.
So shall we talk about Sora?
Yes, Sora has Biomon with her Spiral Twister, who's a pink bird, and she digivolves into Birdramon with the Meteor Wing, which I find very memorable. And then Birdramon digivolves into Totempolmon, or as it's more accurately known, Garudamon. She's enormous.
She's huge. She can carry all the Digidestin in her hands at one point, I think.
And what's Sora's crest that activates that? Love.
I think in Japanese it's probably got 2 syllables because she's always saying, mine's love.
Yes, it's probably even a less sort of blanket concept than love in the original Japanese. It's a bit kind of simplistic. It's supposed to be kind of like empathy, sympathy between all members of the group, wanting to bring them all together, create harmony and good group dynamic. And we don't really have a proper word for that, do we? So they've just gone for love. which I suppose is quite suitable.
It's activated when she's learning about how her mother is protective because she loves her, not just because she wants her to work in her flower shop for free.
Yes, that didn't really ring true with me. Her mother's a right bitch.
Yes, taking a few knocks during games of soccer. I mean, I think that's okay, isn't it? So perhaps she's a little too protective.
There's some terrible parenting on Digimon. I think that's why the children characters are the future of humanity. The parents are all beyond help, quite frankly.
Garudamon and Lilymon and Zudomon are all good examples of how the Digimon get more human or more anthropomorphic as they digivolve.
I'm sure a lot of people have a lot to say about Sora, but I can't think of anything else, really. People like to say she has a good relationship with Matt, or a good relationship with Ty, or both, or even Joe. But, I don't know. She's very much one of the group, and as we were saying earlier, will get on with everyone, but I don't think she has a particularly strong duo relationship with anyone.
Shall we be a little controversial now?
Oh yes, go on.
People like to ship Ty and Sora, and some people like to ship Sora and Matt, I believe. I don't see it with either of them.
No, it's just not in there.
I mean, there's this bit where Sora gets kidnapped, and Ty's going to try and rescue her, and he's going, oh, I must save Sora, but he might as well just be saying, I must save Joe, I must save Izzy. It could be any of them.
It's only normal group dynamics. There really is nothing like the Matt and Ty link between any other members. And as you were saying, if Matt and Ty were actually one male, one female, everybody would ship them all over the place, wouldn't they?
They would.
But let's not get into the ins and outs and rights and wrongs of that now, because we've already been talking far too long.
Well, apparently, and I've read a little bit about this and seen a couple of clips, Sora and Matt start pursuing a romantic relationship, and Ty appears to be getting jealous.
But who exactly is he jealous of? I expect they've left it very ambiguous on purpose.
The official line is that, yes, Matt and Sora are married with 2 children at the end of the series, as it appears in that end bit where they explain all kinds of things, including Matt and Gabumon have been to Mars.
And everyone in the world has their own Digimon. This is why Season 2 is rubbish, quite frankly.
One reason. I watched that sequence, and they stand next to each other, the different characters, at various different points. It's never explicitly said this is the child of those 2 characters, or these 2 are married. Matt and Ty are standing next to each other in the last shot, and Sora's standing next to Joe, and the children are just sort of dotted about, so who's to say what really happened?
Yeah, I think whatever the official line or members of the production team have said afterwards, I think it's left completely ambiguous, completely deliberately. I think there's supposed to be a lot more beneath the surface that we don't explicitly get told, and we can read into it what we like. I
think so too, and the official line is just to shut people up who want definitive, clear-cut answers, isn't it?
It is to shut people up. I mean, we're going to get too controversial now. There is still a lot of intrinsic homophobia in the world, and sometimes it might not be seen as quite right to say, oh, Matt and Ty are a couple, you know, some people feel they should be put with a girl, and perhaps some official lines have pandered to that, because that's kind of been what's expected. So hopefully, if TK and Kari have anything to say about it, that kind of attitude will disappear from the world over the next 100 years or so, and people from the original Digimon production crew, or their descendants anyway, will be quite free to say, yes, you can put whatever spin on it you like, and Matt and Ty may well be a gay couple.
But just to be clear, we're not saying anybody definitely did or didn't marry anybody. We're saying we think that they completely left it up to the imagination of the viewer.
Yeah, that's the whole point, isn't it? You can put your own spin on it, and that's the best thing to have an ambiguous ending. The final member of the Digi-Destined is Izzy. Now, he hasn't been left till last because he's the least interesting or the least good character, far from it. I really like Izzy as a character, and his Digimon, Tentamon, is probably my favourite character overall on the whole show. He's really, really funny. The voice is really, really funny. They give him all sorts of terribly amusing things to say, and they can make him say what they want because he has no mouth movement, like Orko on He-Man. And the relationship between Izzy and Tentamon is one of the ones I find very compelling. Izzy is a computer nerd, and, well, he became a computer nerd after accidentally finding out that he was adopted, didn't he?
But then he comes to terms with that.
And Tentamon is kind of a computerized ladybird sort of creature. So he reflects Izzy's kind of personality in that way. And kind of like Gomamon and Joe, Tentamon kind of encourages Izzy to come out of himself, which is a fine bit of Izzy's journey. But unlike Joe, it's not that Izzy isn't comfortable with himself. He's just more comfortable having relationships with the computers and software than he is with people. And Tentamon very much encourages him to come out of that frame of mind as he grows and develops. And I think Izzy does that very nicely and has a very nice journey, unlike Joe and Mimi. Izzy's journey I find very linear and very appropriately developed and very pleasing.
There's a bit where Izzy's all absorbed in trying to do something on his laptop, and Tentamon's explaining to someone who's saying, why isn't Izzy interacting with us more? Why is he just staring at the computer screen? Tentamon explains, what does he say? Something like, he gets caught up in his work and he doesn't always interact well with others, but... And then he explains why that is.
Yes, good old Tentamon.
And because he's a sort of clown and he makes jokes, like Gomamon with Joe, he compliments Izzy in that way and brings him out of his comfort zone by, in some ways, being his opposite or being the part of his personality that he can't access quite so easily, perhaps.
That's very true. One of my very favourite scenes in the series featured Izzy and Tentamon. Izzy was in some sort of trance and Tentamon was trying to bring him out of it, and because Izzy was kind of incapacitated and his mind was elsewhere, Tentamon was regressing first into his in-training form, Motimon, and then into his baby form with the diaper. And
I think it's called Pabumon.
Pabumon. And it was really intense and exciting. We were all like, oh, come on, Izzy, you've got to snap out of it. I mean, what's going to happen next? He's going to turn into a Digi-Egg. You're going to have no one to bring you back. And Izzy did manage to snap out of it and come through. And then we saw 5 of Tentamon's Digivolving stages within the space of about a minute, which was very exciting.
And it was the first time that Kabuterimon Digivolved into Mega Kabuterimon, was it?
It had been the second, but it was very early.
Oh, bother. Oh, well.
Yes. Kabuterimon is Tentamon's champion form, and this I always remembered from when we were watching it in 2001. Tentamon Digivolve to Kabuterimon, and we used to absolutely laugh ourselves silly at that.
With the funny voice.
The funny voice, he just does it in such a fun way.
Unfortunately, the first few times he digivolves into Kabuterimon, they haven't got Kabuterimon's voice right, have they?
No, it's a shame.
Never mind, it comes.
And then Kabuterimon Digivolve to Mega Kabuterimon, which is also quite funny.
And if you want to know about his mega form, it's Hercules Kabuterimon, which makes sense because Mega Kabuterimon looks kind of like a Hercules beetle.
Yes, he does, and Ladybird is a beetle, as we know, so he's kind of different stages of beetle all the way through. Although Champion Kabuterimon is more sort of locust-like beetle, isn't he?
It does make a lot more sense than Poodle, Cat, Angel, Dragon.
It does, yes. Izzy is really, really useful to the group because they're in a digital world and he can do all this stuff with his laptop. He's, you could argue, the linchpin of the group in practical terms because what could they do digitally without him?
Let's talk about that bit we love, where
What's
they're
that?
trying to open the gate.
Oh, yes!
And they have to slot all the cards into the right place and it's a sort of puzzle thing. And they're all top trumps Digimon cards, really, aren't they?
Just so we'll want to buy them.
But everyone except Izzy hasn't got a bloomin' clue, but it's just when Tys come back from Tokyo and they split up and they've had Wergarurumon's diner and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Tys brought them all back together and they have not only accepted him but nominated him as their leader. And they're saying, oh, Ty, you do it, you put the cards in the door, you get us through this gate. And Ty says, so you're saying whatever I do, you'll accept it, right? And they say yes. And he says, in that case then, Izzy's going to do it. That's my decision.
Now that's the perfect example of why Ty is such a good leader, and how they can all come together and work as a good team with different strengths for different people. And a good leader will know what members of his or her team have these strengths and when to use them, rather than trying to push him or herself forward all the time and do everything, which is something that Ty never does. There are certain things that Ty is the best at in the group. Physically, he's definitely the most capable. But also, without him, they don't know how to coordinate their own strengths and weaknesses. And that's why when he's disappeared for a bit, they will wander off and don't know what to do. I was wondering at that point, when we were watching it one time, is Ty actually a good leader? And that made me realise, oh yes, he is. He is the glue that keeps the group together. Without him, they can't effectively function. They may know their own strengths and weaknesses, but they can't use them to great effect without Ty to coordinate. So that scene is a brilliant scene for Ty and for Izzy, because it very much shows how they do rely on him in practical terms to help them in the digital world.
By the way, Izzy's crest is the crest of knowledge,
Which is extremely appropriate, and never once does he deviate from his crest quality, like some of them do. And his knowledge of himself, his relationships within the group, does increase during the series, just as his knowledge of the digital world increases. So everything about Izzy as a character is very well done and very compelling, I think. It also has a certain dry sense of humour, which I like. His relationship with his parents might be slightly difficult. The problem is, I think, that they aren't kind of prepared to talk to him about what really matters, and that's why they have these secret whispered conversations in the living room in the middle of the night with the door open, and Izzy comes and listens to them and feels insecure about himself. But during the course of the series, they do learn, don't they, as a family, to communicate better. It's interesting when Izzy's locked himself in his bedroom with Tentamon, and his parents are like, oh, well, he's obviously in there touching himself. But we
That's interesting, is it?
Well, it is, because they don't really understand him at that point. Although he may do that sometimes. But the important thing is that by the end of the series, the door is no longer locked, metaphorically, between Izzy and his parents. They have learned to interact better, to tell each other the truth, to have a good relationship, just as Izzy's learned to have a better relationship with the other members of the Digidestined. So everything about Izzy, I think, makes sense and is right. And Tentamon is the perfect Digimon to help him do that, and he's really, really funny as well.
I like, at the very end of the series, the individual goodbyes between the Digidestined and their Digimon. So, for instance, Matt doesn't really want to talk, and Gabumon respects that and just listens to him playing his harmonica. And then I think straight after that, possibly, it just cuts to TK and Patamon in floods and floods of tears, because they're much more expressive. And Tentamon and Izzy are having a very sort of calm, collected, as if everything's normal kind of a conversation, and then Izzy suddenly turns around and says, I love you, Tentamon. Tentamon is knocked for 6, but then that reflects Izzy's journey.
He falls on the floor, it's terribly funny.
Ah, yes, good old Tentamon.
It's a very effective ending to the series, that, and it's much better than the ending to the second series, which we've watched, which may have its ambiguity, but it's not, it doesn't leave you feeling so emotionally touched, I think.
Gabumon and Matt on Mars is just silly.
So perhaps we'll talk next about what's wrong with the second series, we think. I'll just say some of my favourite bits of Tentamon. When he says, did you hear that? It sounded evil. We absolutely killed ourselves laughing. On its own, it's not a funny line, but he made it absolutely brilliant. And when he was talking about...
Do I look stronger to you?
Do I look stronger to you?
I don't know, make a muscle.
I was! Absolutely hilarious. And when Tentamon's explaining about the arrows of love, which is deeply symbolic in itself. But
oh yes, they've been talking about Cupid, and then Angemon and Angewomon are shooting Matt and Ty with their arrows of love.
So that Gabumon and Agumon can warp Digivolve into their Megaform.
Obviously.
The way Tentamon talks about arrows of love. It's just so funny. It's one of the best things you can do with a character is appreciate all the deeper things that they say and do, like we hear with Tentamon, and absolutely kill yourself laughing when they're being funny as well. Season 2 of Digimon, I think, tries to recreate all this deep stuff we've been talking about, and from what we can tell, not having watched it all the way through, it rather seems to fail, don't you think?
Well, I did watch it all the way through quite a long time ago, so I don't remember it very well. At the time, I thought it wasn't as good as what I'd seen of the first series, but I did like it, but I hadn't seen all that Skull Greymon and delegating to Izzy and all those journeys that they'd been on, so I didn't realise how deep the first series was. And we did watch the first episode of the second series, didn't we?
And it's kind of skimmed off the top of the first series.
It's got this thing where the Digimon can't digivolve and the Digidestined, 2 of whom are Kari and TK, and then there are 3 new ones initially. They have to find Digi-Eggs so that the Digimon can armor digivolve. Armor digivolve, golden armor digivolve, DNA digivolve. It just gets silly.
That's just rubbish for a start.
But anyway, Davis, who's just annoying and awful,
he's a dick to everyone for no reason,
finds his egg thing, and then his Digimon Vmon, who I can't see any kind of special link like with Tentamon and Izzy and all the rest, armor digivolves into a sort of dragon thing or something, and defeats the Digimon who's threatening them at the moment, and Tys there, and he says to Davis something along the lines of, "Oh, you broke your goggles, you can have mine because the leader of the Digidestined wears goggles." And we're like, leader of the Digidestined?
What on earth has he done to earn that? But it's that bit, isn't it, where Ty's calling out to Davis, "Come on, Davis, show courage so that Vmon can armor Digivolve." And Davis is like, "All right, then I'll show courage." And it happens. Whereas in the first series, it would have taken 5 episodes to build up to that by really showing and developing the quality that is required to make the Digimon Digivolve. It's the concepts scraped off the first series and hurried into the second series and not done properly, I think.
It does have a good idea, the second series, which is introduced in that first episode, the Digimon Emperor, who's this kid, and he's got what appears to be a minion called Wormmon, and he's sitting there going, "Ha ha ha, I have the dark Digivice." And your first instinct is to sort of go, "Pfft, dark Digivice, whatevs." But actually, his name is not the Digimon Emperor, his name is Ken, and it turns out that he's had some trauma and some problems in his family, and he is abusing his position as one of the Digidestined. And his Digivice is only dark because your Digivice is what you make it.
Yeah, so this is why I'm going to watch the second series properly one day, because it obviously does have some of the things in there that we like to see.
I do remember getting quite interested in that, but the magic of the first series can never be recaptured, and they haven't even really tried. "Oh, come on, Davis, show courage." Okay, here's some courage, as Jake was saying. That's not right.
That really struck the wrong note with me, particularly after investing so much in the journeys they had in the first series. But there we are. Perhaps in 4 years we'll come back and do a podcast about Digimon Season 2 and tell you what we really think of it, having watched it and talked about it properly.
I wonder how we'll feel about Kari and TK actually being older. Are they still hope and light? Not in the same way, I wouldn't have thought.
No, TK seems to have lost a lot of his appeal, I think. But, I don't know, maybe the new voice actor, who is a man and therefore does make him sound older, will get into it more, and I won't be feeling so much that TK's lost all his appeal.
By the way, the younger boys were voiced by women, weren't they, in Season 1?
Yes.
And Izzy still is in Season 2.
Yes, I do think Izzy's voice is very good, actually. She's one of the South Park voice women. You can hear her on a lot of cartoons, Mona Marshall. I do like her Izzy voice, and she kind of adapts it to sound a bit older for Season 2.
Except in the first episode.
Except in the first episode. But I don't know, maybe there's more there that we'll be interested in to talk about someday. And we've talked about the final episode a lot, haven't we, of Season 2?
Yes, we have. I don't think there's anything else to say about it.
No, we've said it all, really, about the ambiguity and the interpretations and the feeling it leaves you with perhaps not being quite as good as the first series. So perhaps our Digimon podcast will come to an end there. What do you think?
I think it had better.
So hopefully you've enjoyed it and you haven't found it too offensive. And we hope that it will entice you to join us again next time for another epic cartoon podcast, this time on the subject of Dogtanian and the Three Muskehounds. It'll be one for all and all for one in our next exciting podcast. But until then, what more can we possibly say except...
Good night out there.
Whatever you are.